second or third marriage, and an older couple, and they wanted to record it for their extended families, of course.
Yeah.
And at the end of the service, the phone is sitting on a tripod recording, and literally the last thing I say, it then just sort of hops out and crashes on the ground, and the phone's fine, but the recording was gone.
Oh no.
And so, and then there was this question of like, well, are we gonna do it again?
Can we do it again? Can we have a
I mean,
do-over?
take a second take, and they opted for no, and I was like, okay, I think that's fine.
You wonder if it was really on before.
Well, there's that question too,
Yeah.
and I usually tried to do a lot of that myself, but they had someone who wanted to do it anyway.
Because it would have gone to the cloud or something.
Yeah, you'd think so. Yeah. Well, friends, it's good to be back with you. Thanks for braving the weather, which is now looking quite delightful. But as I was sharing before, I think that the forecast looks like following worship, it's going to hit really hard. And so folks, stay safe out there. Let's open with a word of prayer. Today's prayer, this comes from our denominational resource, which has a daily prayer process, which I think is really lovely. So let's open with a word of prayer. Eternal God, our beginning and our end, be our starting point, we pray, and our safe haven, and accompany us in this day's journey. Use our hands to do the work of your creation, and use our lives to bring to others the new life you give this world in Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of all. Amen. That theme of how we can work in creation to bring forth God's purposes is very central to the theme of today's chapter, in chapter 2 of Ruth. We'll get to that in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to share a quick note that Holly and I were talking about February Sunday school. There's a possibility this may bleed over into February, but at the same time, we're also kind of looking ahead, and I wanted to see what y'all thought. If we were to continue with like a 4-week, I think February's just got 4 weeks in it, a 4-week study in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, something that would pick up on these themes and kind of show how they come to fruition in the book of Acts. Would that sound good to y'all? Okay. All right, we'll plan on that, and it'll be sort of starting in Pentecost, which I think works nicely with Ruth. Remember, it's a Pentecost reading in the Jewish tradition. It's kind of interesting to see how that plays in our Christian tradition as well. So we'll look at that come February. So once again, our two basic questions that we are using to engage with the book of Ruth are, what concerns does this text press upon us? We're wanting to let the text speak to us and guide us as we are reflecting and lingering in our slow reading strategy on details and questions as they come up for us. And then a second question of, how does this guide our life together today? I want to actually raise that second question for y'all, and maybe you had some reflections over the course of the last week, but has anything come up for you as we've been reflecting, particularly on that second point of how does this text guide our life together today? Anything that's been on your mind, or maybe we can just dive in today, but wanted to give ourselves a chance to think about that. Have any of these discussions been kind of provoking something for you, like that makes me think differently about this in our life together? Yeah.
It's made me want to know more about the history behind things I had not thought about that you brought up last week. Like about judges and how we went from judges to Ruth, so forth. And then the immigration issues that we have today, and how it relates to what you were talking about last week. And it made me just want to read the Bible more. So I appreciate what you've been saying.
Well, that's really cool. Yeah, there's a sense of, if we read this like a wisdom book, it should provoke a further search, right? And so the fact that it's inspiring that kind of curiosity and wonder, the book is doing its work on us, right? As we seek to know more and to learn more and to bring it, to let it hit the ground running in really important questions of whether it's immigration, concepts of belonging, how we come together, especially how we come together in times of crisis, across lines that we thought were quite a bit more permanent than they actually are. Yeah.
I thought women always in the Bible were not treated as well, but then when you talked about what they could do, like if the husband dies, the brother has to marry, that type of thing. There were some safeguards there to try to protect women.
Yeah. Well, and then that's a question too. And this gets us a little bit into chapter 2, which I think will set the stage really well. So that kind of a law, is that a safeguard or is it a straitjacket? Right? And I think what it raises is a question of agency, is how much choice and independence and agency women have in the Bible and in this story in particular, as these women are trying to navigate a structure. And again, that law that you're referring to, levirate marriage, the provision is that because the ancestral inheritance is passed through the male line, if there are no male heirs at the time of death of the patriarch in the family, then the next closest male of kin, whether it be a brother or farther removed, must then take up that marriage in order to ensure a family line. And so think about what that's telling us about the kind of philosophy of belonging, the sense of hope for the future, too, is that if there are no men involved, there's no hope for the future. Which is very interesting in a book that's called Ruth. And so what we're seeing is the way in which these women are creating a provision for the future. And that's where it gets back to your question. Is this question of kinship, of the next closest male in line coming in, is that a safeguard or is it a straitjacket? What do you all think? How much choice do you have in this kind of a situation? Or is that really the most important issue?
Well, it depends on who the brother is.
That's true. That is really true.
That's bold.
Yeah. But it's a really good point, is it might depend on the character of the person involved.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
But it didn't matter.
So were they still allowed to have more than one wife at that time?
That's a good question. What do you think?
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
Suppose the next in line
Yeah.
already married,
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and how far do you go
Exactly.
past that?
Yeah.
And
There-
I think it's interesting that Naomi and Ruth are taking control of their destiny.
There we are. Yeah.
Uh,
And that's right where we close that. We're not quite done with the first chapter, so we'll finish that out. But that is right where we were arriving. Remember Naomi, she rose up in the land of Moab and decided to return, to turn back to the land of Judah. And in the same way, Ruth made a distinct choice to stick by Naomi. There's a sense in which they are taking control of their destiny. Now, that doesn't mean that they know everything's going to be okay. They're in as vulnerable a situation as you can be in this time period. They are women. Ruth is a Moabite, a foreigner who is going to come into this foreign land now. They have no men in their immediate vicinity that can provide economically for their household or protect them physically. Because remember, in the days of the judges judging, this is a dangerous time. Women's bodies are deeply vulnerable, profoundly vulnerable in this time. So, Sharon, you said something about it didn't really matter. Can you come back to that a second?
Women had no say. This is the way that it was. And it wasn't questioned. It just was. So the fact that I've always assumed, and this is probably an inappropriate assumption, that Ruth was relatively attractive.
Okay, fair
And
enough.
maybe it's because Boaz accepted her so easy. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they were in a pickle.
Yeah.
There were no male people to take care of them,
Mhm.
and they didn't have any visible means of support.
Right.
And we all know that the only means of support for women in those days was becoming a whore, which probably was not all that terribly uncommon because you have to eat.
Right.
And if you don't have someone to provide for you,
Right. Then what do you
you're out of
do?
luck. And it really didn't matter what women wanted or thought or whatever. They were just, I don't want to say they were pawns, but kind of they were.
They fit into, pawn might be one way of thinking about it. They were an economic unit in a sense,
Yeah.
right? They fit into an economy of the household
Yes.
And that's where the inequality really materializes.
Yes.
With this question of how do we provide for ourselves? Well, why is that even a question? I think you are right that the foundational structure is not questioned here.
Yeah.
Right? They're still looking for a way to navigate within this kinship network that depends on male heads of household.
Yeah.
However, the question of do they have a choice? Are choices being made here?
Yeah.
Tons, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so this is where we're seeing it kind of play out of how do you make choices under very difficult conditions and conditions that devalue your life.
They were very clever.
Yeah.
And many of the women in the Bible are very clever.
Mm.
And the ones that are mentioned are the ones that survive.
Yeah, that's well put. Yeah, because we don't see Orpah after she turns back to Moab, right? Yeah, we didn't mention this last week. Her name means back of the neck, right? There are two possible kind of levels of meaning, and probably more, to what that could be pointing to. One could be when they first decide to part ways, it says that the three of them come together and they weep with one voice.
So sad.
You might kind of picture that when you are weeping and with someone else, that there might be an embrace, and so back of the neck could be pointing to this like embrace of like holding closely. It may also point to the fact that she turns back and parts ways, and so you kind of see her from the back of the neck. It's sort of the tail lights, and she's gone. And it may be both together, and it may be more. But we see her, and then she is no longer part of the story. But Ruth makes a choice, and she remains part of the story.
But Ruth says that she says that the hand of Yahweh has gone forth against me. So she truly believes that she is in the most horrible place you can possibly be.
Yeah.
But that negates how bright she is.
Yeah.
I mean, she's so darn smart.
So let's pick up there. So I think last week we left off at about verse 18. If y'all don't have a packet, there are a few extras here. Otherwise, we'll just continue on here. So verse 18 is where we kind of left off. After Ruth has made her covenant promise to Naomi, she's using very formal language of covenant in committing herself to live with Naomi. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. It is only death that will come between me and you. And then verse 18, and she, that is Naomi, saw that she was determined to go with her, and she gave up speaking to her. Just a quick comment on that. What does that mean? How do you read that? She gave up speaking to her.
I'm not going to argue anymore.
All right, whatever.
Yeah, all right, whatever. That's right. Yeah, and the Hebrew Bible has got a lot of this. There are moments where people are interceding on behalf of others in conversation with God, and sometimes there are moments of, okay, I give up. Exasperation is something that the Hebrew Bible is familiar with. It's a deeply human experience.
But I've never thought about this before. How do you think Naomi felt when Ruth stuck by her? I mean, she had a champion. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
You know, you guys cannot understand how close women can be.
Yeah.
And when we have girl time together, it is amazing.
Yeah.
It really is.
Sure. Yeah.
So these two,
But I wonder if Naomi was a little bit worried about taking a Moabite or
Ooh, that's
Moabite
a good
test
point.
into the country.
Yeah.
yeah.
So this question of giving up speaking to her could be exasperation, like, okay, fine. It could be maybe like a speechless awe, like, oh, wow, someone really stuck up for me. Maybe it's going to be okay. It could also be, we are in for it. Yeah, a lot of possibilities. Anything else?
And that tells you evidently the kinship, because how did they know she was a Moabite? Could have they pretended
Ooh.
that she wasn't, but they didn't?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. There's going to be information like that seems to circulate, and it's not always said on stage how people know. But let's keep that as an open question and kind of see who knows what and when. Yeah. All right, so let's keep pressing. Here's verse 19. And the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And it happened when they came to Bethlehem that the whole city was buzzing about them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" Keep going. And she said to them, "Don't call me Naomi," meaning my pleasantness. "Call me Mara," bitterness. "For Shaddai has made it very bitter for me." Quick comment. Shaddai is, it doesn't come up everywhere in the Hebrew Bible, but it means Almighty. So sometimes you might see El Shaddai, meaning God Almighty. She's using a very old school type of language to make reference to God here. So Shaddai has made it very bitter for me. "I was full when I walked away, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and Shaddai has done me evil?" And Naomi came back, and Ruth the Moabite, her bride daughter, with her, the one who turned back from the fields of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Let's pause there. It's a nice kind of closed scene for chapter 1 as well.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what Naomi, now called Mara, is saying here. What do you make of this, the way that she is interpreting her life and interpreting God's actions in her life?
We've all been there.
Been where?
How can it get worse? I
Hmm.
mean, this is the crappiest thing that I can
Yeah.
possibly imagine, and then of course it does.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for this lady, this is the pits.
Yeah.
She's got no sons.
Yeah.
She's got a daughter-in-law who's a Moabite and won't leave.
Yeah. Won't leave her alone. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. But everybody in Bethlehem knows the story, which is just really
buzzing around.
Yeah.
Buzzing, like
Yeah.
they're coming back.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
she's bringing Ruth with her.
That's it.
It's not like they can see it on social media or something, like, how does everybody know?
Yeah, that's a great
the
question.
servants tell everybody everything.
Yeah.
Was there some indication that Ruth may have been a temple prostitute?
So, what does the text tell us?
Nothing.
The text tells us she's a Moabite. And so there is a distinct possibility that that association, because of Israel's experience and memory from the book of Numbers, that when you're talking about Moab, that's where your mind goes. And so, Sharon, your point about is she attractive, there is a sense in which her whole character is built on that history
Yeah.
that is already deeply sensual, if that makes sense. And so, and we'll hear in chapter 3 a little bit more about that, but it's not said, and what's interesting is whether or not that's true, this is a small town. That's 100% what everyone's thinking, right?
Buzzing about.
They're buzzing about, this is, yeah. So I think that what we can go on is what the connotation is. And that's definitely the connotation. Yeah. Along with the prospect of a loss of faith in the Lord, because with that temple prostitution was the sense of idolatry too. The two were kind of conjoined.
And they keep calling her Ruth the Moabite.
Yeah, you're going to see this again and again. It's
not
Ruth the
just
Moabite.
Ruth, it's
Yeah.
Ruth the Moabite.
Yeah.
And she said she was
Ruth the
full when,
foreigner. Ruth the foreigner.
Yeah, that's right.
well, she said she was full when she walked away, but he brought me back empty, so she's not counting Ruth as an asset.
True.
Yes.
I'm empty.
Yeah.
How interesting. Yeah. Because think about what she's got to now consider.
Everything.
If before it was, how do I provide for myself? Now there's another person involved. And you're exactly right, she's reading Ruth as part of this emptiness. So there's going to be this question of, well, does Ruth count? What counts as full? What counts as empty? There's something we haven't quite poked on yet. We've said, sure, we've been there, right? We've been in the pits. We think it can't get possibly worse, and then it does. We think we've hit rock bottom, but we realize there's a basement, right? It goes deeper and deeper. There's a choice that Naomi makes in interpreting her experience here. Whose fault is this?
God.
Yeah. She's attributing these events to God's agency. She is saying, God has done this to me. I want to look at this language when she says, when the Lord has testified against me. Where does this language of testimony come from? It's very formal, traditional language for a particular context. Where do we talk about taking testimony? testifying against somebody, court of law. It's interesting, in the days of the judges judging was verse 1, right? We're back to this question of judgment. And she is saying that the Lord is judging against her. How does she know? Did the booming voice come from heaven to say, you, Naomi, have sinned and you're a terrible person? What has happened that she would interpret this?
She's lost all the men in her life.
Jeez. Yeah. And the famine before that, too.
Yeah.
So she is saying that these terrible things are a revelation of God's testimony against her. Why does she think that's the case?
I think that that's one of the things when we have really tough times in our lives, we have a choice. We can turn to God or we can turn away from God. And then she's, at this point, she's turned away. Yeah.
Well, let's push on that. Is she saying, I no longer trust in God?
Kind of.
She is certainly antagonistic.
But she's asking questions.
Yeah.
She's questioning, but she hasn't exactly pulled totally away.
Sounds like she thinks God has left her.
Yeah.
Yes.
Isn't this interesting? She's still talking about God. She's still, she said in the previous verses to Ruth, like or to Ruth and Orpah, may the Lord bless you as you have been good to the dead and to me. She's still calling upon the Lord's name to do things, but she kind of thinks that God has turned away against her. It is possible to imagine a relationship with God in which we believe God has wronged us. In the Hebrew Bible, we have, especially in the Psalms, especially in Job, in these wisdom writings, passages that articulate, God, how long will you be upset with me? How long, O Lord, will you let the unrighteous triumph? How long will you let the righteous suffer? Raising questions, right? But it's still in the context of prayer. If you read the Psalms of Lament, it's possible to be in a relationship with God in which you are saying, when are you going to fix this? So, here's the question. What theology is at play there? If bad things are happening to you, does that mean God is speaking judgment against you? If bad things are happening to you, does that mean you've done something wrong?
Well, I hear sometimes people say, well, God wouldn't give me anything that he didn't believe I could handle.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they think this is some sort of test they have to pass to get back into God's good graces.
So there's a sense in which, okay, I did something wrong. God is now going to give me a test. I'll kind of work off what I did wrong to get back into good graces. Such an interesting use of the word grace there, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, in what sense is that grace? So that's certainly a theology that people use. What else? I'll state it again, kind of as we're trying to read underneath the surface here. If bad things are happening, and that means God is testifying against us, doing us evil, and we interpret that as we've done something wrong, then we're saying there's something in the nature of the world and in the nature of God's relationship to us, in which case, I do something good, good things happen to me, God speaks blessing into my life. And if I do something wrong, then bad things will happen to me and God will curse me accordingly. So reading your own life experiences, whether what's happened to you or what's happened to people you see around you or kind of what you see in the world, does that seem true to you?
No.
That's saying
But
God.
I still hear people
That's
say
saying
that.
God
Sure.
is. I'm sorry. go ahead.
Yeah. So you hear people say it, doesn't seem true to you, but people do say it
And people
still.
will say it to someone who's having troubles,
Can you
That
imagine?
God won't give you anything you can't handle, or God
Yeah.
knew, or God's sending you a message,
Right.
And those kinds of things just, my hackles go up, and
Yeah.
I just,
So
I turn them off completely when
Yeah.
they say something like that.
What sends your hackles? there.
I just don't believe that God is sitting up there going, I'm gonna give you cancer, and I'm gonna
Right.
give you a child with a disability, and I'm gonna have you have a miscarriage. I don't think he does that. I think he's there with us, no matter what happens.
Yeah.
And he's there to go on that journey with us, and that's very different from sitting up above saying, let's make this happen and see how that goes.
Yeah.
That's a very cruel God in my sense.
What about Job?
Yeah.
What he went through?
Well, that was a bit.
Because God was
I was gonna say, where's Satan in all this?
Right. And
having a discussion with the devil.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Job is. We may have to have a separate study of the book of Job. I don't want to take us too far down this road. I would only raise the question of when the book begins with the way Job does, what do you think it's trying to tell you? When the story begins with, well, God and Satan made a bet.
It's just a story.
So it makes you believe that God can toy with your life.
So, and we push into chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Job, and it makes it very clear there is no reason for this.
Yeah.
It makes it very clear that
He's a pawn.
there is evil being brought upon Job's life for no reason at all. And so, if you're coming to the book of Job, or if you're coming to your life with the question of why are these bad things happening to me, what's the book of Job's answer? No reason at all. And so there is so again, think of Job as, again, very much like Ruth. If you're reading it in the context of the Hebrew canon, it's a wisdom book. It's designed to help you think about your life and about your life experience and to reason together as a community. Job's answer to the question of suffering is sometimes there's not a reason.
Yeah.
And that is a really helpful thing in the context of suffering that feels meaningless, is to realize it is. There's not an answer to the question of why here. By contrast with the book of Proverbs, which thinks there's a reason to all of it. You're hurting right now because you made a bad choice last Tuesday. And to some extent, there's a reason to that too. There's a rationale. We know that our actions have consequences, and some of them can be measured that way, but some of them can't. Cheryl, you were going to say something earlier.
Basically what Peggy was saying, and that is just to say that that's giving God the power that he looks over every little thing we do, and the essence that Peggy will do this, and Carl will do that.
Yeah.
And that's a very uncomfortable place for me as well.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, we do know our actions have consequences, and we do bring on some of our own suffering. But you don't have to live very long to see that there are people that get enormous suffering, and there's nothing they did.
Right. And flip it the other way too. There are plenty of people we see getting away with, come on,
Absolutely.
right?
Right.
And you're sitting there thinking, where's the justice in this?
Where's karma when you need
Right.
it?
Yeah, exactly. And that is the question routinely in the Psalms as well. Like, how long will you let the unjust, the unrighteous prevail? And when will the poor have their answer? Yeah.
There are numerous religions who believe that if you have a God, you have to have a devil. If you have heaven, you have to have hell. That there is this dynamics that positive, negative. Okay, it goes this way and it goes this way. Physiologically, with the human body and diseases and whatever, we see that. We see the good and the bad, and that's a tough, read Dante's Inferno.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's some depressing stuff right there.
Yeah. Well, and so I think what this shows us is that these questions of good and evil, prosperity and suffering, blessing and suffering, blessing and pain, these are all live questions in our lives. And the question of how we make sense of it all is where the wisdom literature of the Bible comes into play in helping us wrestle with that together. And so that is exactly what these verses are pushing us into, is pushing us to reflect, has God testified against Naomi through the suffering she has endured? And then the second question is, what's going to happen next? Yeah. Okay, so this is our setup, right? This is all Ruth 1, this is the setup. And it raises these questions of providence, how God is working in the world, how God is working in the world to provide for us. It raises questions of belonging, how we connect, especially how we cross these lines of borders, of race and ethnicity, right? We're talking about a Jew and a Gentile here. These questions of what it means to be a woman in this time and how we respond to suffering and vulnerability and what choices we have. So let's take the plunge into chapter 2. And as we do, pay close attention to where chapter 1 left us. It was the time of the barley harvest.
Yes.
Chapter 1 opened and closed with a setting that was attached to the land. There was famine in the land, and that's what drove these people out. And here, God has blessed the land to bring forth fertility, and now they come back, and now we are settling in the land once more at the time of the barley harvest. Chapter 2, our translator Ellen Davis has chosen to entitle Gleaning. Gleaning. Gleaning will be a focus of chapter 2. So let's begin. Verse 1. Verse 1, a parenthetical, which of course is no parentheses in the Hebrew Bible.
It's handy as the Dickens.
It is, and that is something that you can kind of detect by the nature of the comment. Because chapter 1 ends with all this action, they land in the barley harvest. Chapter 1 begins, Naomi has a kinsman of her husband, a man of considerable substance from Elimelech's ancestral family, and his name is Boaz. This is like the narrator giving us a clue, setting up the action, right? Let's linger on this for just a moment. What do you make of this line, a man of considerable substance?
Rich.
It's rich, right? Okay. Oh, he's rich.
He's rich.
He's rich. Okay. So one way to read this is, dude's got a lot, right? He's got wealth, he's got power. How else do we use this word, a man of substance, or a person of substance? What else do we use that word, substance?
Character, honor.
Yeah, character, honor. What did you say?
Yeah.
Integrity,
yeah.
character.
They're all positive attributes.
Yeah.
There's nothing about him that's seamy or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can refer to both character as well as power.
Mm-hmm.
And so that question we raised earlier of like, well, it might depend on the guy, right? It certainly does in this case. It's a question of his character.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so with that in mind, let's press on past the parenthetical. Verse 2. And it's, once again, picking up with the action. And Ruth the Moabite, there we have it, Ruth the Moabite, said,
Poor lady.
said
Just can't get away from your past. can
well,
you?
so let's talk about that for just a second. Right, what is she carrying with her everywhere?
Ooh.
Her foreignness.
Her label.
Yes, her foreignness, her label, her past. This is where again, if we're thinking about this question of how does this inform our lives today, I would urge us to think about the ways in which human differences can get carried into every situation, particularly when you're the only person who is other in a situation that is otherwise pretty heterogeneous, right? This is Ruth the Moabite, the foreigner, coming into the land of Bethlehem where everyone is of Judah. So she's the only person out here.
That took a lot of courage.
Yeah.
She didn't have any friends. I mean, what would we do without our friends?
Yeah.
And she had, I mean, her sister's gone. There was no
Mhm.
cell phone. There was no telephone.
Yeah,
There was no way that they could communicate daily.
Yeah.
She had no buds.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the isolation here we should interpret as palpable, right?
Oh, that would be awful.
Yeah. She's got Naomi, but Naomi's given up talking to her, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah, right.
That calls her her daughter.
Yes. Okay, so let's keep reading here. That's good. Keep reading. So Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "So, I'm going to go to the field and glean among the ears, behind someone in whose eyes I find favor." And she said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So yeah, you're exactly right, Carl. There is a claiming here.
Yeah.
Naomi continues to claim her as my daughter.
And that's the first time, isn't it, in the scriptures that she said anything about any kind of relationship that she wants with her?
Let's see.
Because I don't remember, I mean, before it's been like, Ruth the Moabite.
Yeah. So early in chapter 1, when she's talking to both Ruth and Orpah, she says, "Turn back, my daughters." So she does have a way of speaking to them that's maintaining the
relationship.
Exactly. So that is there. But yeah, I mean, I think if we're questioning whether there's any reminiscent antagonism or pain or like, I think this is something. This is something to hang on to.
Okay.
Well, now, if Ruth hadn't come with her, would Naomi have gone out and gleaned? I just wonder.
Let's talk about this. So what is gleaning?
It's crappy.
Say more.
Leftovers.
It's like
It's
picking cotton.
it's going behind and
Mhm.
getting the things what's fallen behind, what hasn't been harvested, what's left over.
What's left over?
Now, good folks who had things said, leave some for people. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Purposely left
God-fearing,
some
yeah.
for the poor to.
Otherwise, if you were cheap and horrible, you took every scrap.
So
Ruth is taking charge here. Naomi didn't recommend her
yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
to do that, or
Yeah.
didn't order her to do it. Ruth said, "I'm going to do this."
So here we are back to the question of agency in the context, right? So Ruth, without a doubt, is taking agency. She's taking action. She's taking this upon herself. She's got a plan. She's going, and she's hoping she's going to find favor, but she is on her way on her own.
She's going to get food.
She's going to go get food.
Practical.
Let's talk about why this is a reasonable expectation to glean. It's in the context of the book of Leviticus that this command comes out. In the same chapter that Jesus will eventually quote from, "Love your neighbor as you love yourself." Earlier in that same passage, Leviticus 19, there is a specific command that you shall not collect what falls as you are harvesting, so that there will be something in the land for those who are poor and hungry to basically come in your field and pick up what they can.
Yeah.
There's also a specific command that you shall not harvest to the corners of your field, but leave them unharvested for the same reason.
Cool.
To ensure that there is food and provision for those who are in Ruth's situation, who don't have their own land right now. So this comes back to this question of ancestral inheritance and how God is providing for those who don't have it. So, in the context of Israel, there is a plan for the poor, that there is a way that they can go and find food, that they shall be fed. Yeah. And Sharon, you're right. There are people who could distinctly decide, well, I'm not doing that. That's not efficient. I have more stuff in my field. It's all mine. I'm going to take it.
And like Cartman, it's mine.
It's mine, exactly, right? But there is
I love that little toad.
there is a feature here of God's commandment of how to live in the land, that efficiency is not the most important thing.
Yeah.
Profit's not the most important thing. What's important is that the people are provided for. And it's a question of, will you find favor under someone who's got the character to follow that law? So here we are, verse 3. And she went and came to the field and gleaned behind the harvesters. And by chance, she happened upon the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, the one from Elimelech's ancestral family. There's our narrator helping us out, right? Giving us an elbow, right? Yeah.
When I told you about it.
Yeah. You know, we know him in verse 1, right? And along came Boaz from Bethlehem, and he said to the harvesters, "The Lord be with you." And they said to him, "May the Lord bless you." I'm going to keep pressing here because we've got some good dialogue. Verse 5. And Boaz said to his worker lad, the one who supervised the harvesters, "To whom does this worker girl belong?" And the worker lad who supervised the harvesters answered and said, "She is a Moabite worker girl who turned back with Naomi from the field of Moab." There's your small town gossip for you. And she said, and this is still in quotes from what the harvester is sharing, And she said, "Please let me glean, and I will gather among the cut ears behind the harvesters." And she came and stood from morning up until now. There has been little of this sitting in the house for her.
Cool.
And Boaz said to Ruth, "Haven't you heard, my daughter? Don't go gleaning in another field. No, you shouldn't go anywhere else. You should stick with my worker girls here." Let's pause there for a second. And we'll kind of work backwards from here. But that verse 8 we need to linger on. "Haven't you heard, my daughter?" he says. What is he referring to? Haven't you heard what? What is he cautioning her against?
The men,
The men.
The men.
What men? What are we talking about?
the workers,
Yeah.
are gonna take advantage of her.
Yeah.
And why is that an assumption that we should have here? What do we know about this time that is what this text is pointing to?
They were lusty.
Immediate post-Judges,
Yeah. Remember how Judges ends. It's women who go into the field to celebrate, and that is where they are apprehended and taken.
Mm-hmm.
Field is a dangerous place for women. And so he says, haven't you heard about what's going on here? Don't go anywhere else. Stick with, that's the same word that is used for what Ruth does with Naomi. She stuck by her. And so Boaz is saying, stick with my worker girls here. You'll be safe here. Yeah. All right, let's keep pressing. Verse 9. And again, this is Boaz still speaking. "Keep your eyes on the field where they are harvesting and walk behind the women. Haven't I ordered the worker lads not to touch you?" There it is. "When you get thirsty, go to the jars and drink from what the worker lads draw." And she fell on her face and bowed to the ground. Pause. What kind of response is that? In what other contexts in the Bible do people behave that way? Do they fall on their face and bow to the ground?
The king.
Jesus.
The king, what else?
God.
God, Jesus. This is the way you respond to the divine presence. And here, it's operating through a person. Very interesting. "And she said to him, 'Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you would give me recognition? And I am nothing but a foreigner.' And Boaz answered and said to her, 'Of course it has been told to me, everything that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, that you left behind your father and your mother and the land where you were born, and went to a people you didn't know at all a day or two ago. May the Lord repay your action, and may your recompense be complete from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take shelter.'"
That is so pretty.
Let's pause there. What's pretty to you?
That's pretty. I mean, that's beautiful. Under whose wings you have come to take shelter.
Now, that's a very poetic turn of phrase, isn't it? Can y'all think where else in the Bible we hear language like that?
Psalms.
Yeah, absolutely. Jesus will even pick up on it in the New Testament when he's weeping over Jerusalem. How I would have come like a hen and gathered you as my chicks under my wings. It's a particular form of language in the Psalms and the prophets and here too for finding provision under God's care, as though God is like a mother bird kind of gathering and finding giving shelter under to its offspring. And so look at who's doing what here. Has the Lord intervened? Have we had the thunder crashes from heaven? Do we have a divine presence showing up and walking? Are there angels? What's going on?
It said back here that by chance she found herself in Boaz's field.
Yeah. So, yeah, how seriously do we take that?
Well, people talk about something being a God thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or that
But
it's not
it
a
doesn't say God directed her, it just says
Yeah.
that by chance.
Yeah.
Um,
And then sometimes, we might interpret it as God leading us to a place, but there is certainly there's no fiery pillar leading her there.
Yeah. My sister believes there are no accidents, though.
So even if that's the case, and we can look backwards and realize, oh, God was leading, guiding my steps to, it takes place in these very happenstance kind of ways. And so this question of like, how does God's providence work in our lives? Very small choices here and there. I just happened to be in the right field with the right guy who was going to order the worker lads not to touch her, right? It takes a lot. Let's look back at what are all the things that had to fall into place for this to be okay. So by chance, she's in the right field.
No, she's not.
Yeah.
She's not by chance.
Not by chance.
She's the ancestor of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so we know that, right? Because that's where things go, right? And we can see the line looking backward. But look at it from the starting point going forward. You know, how does all that come together so that that follows? Right? Yeah, we say by chance, by accident.
Don't we know that God knows what's then and now
Yes.
and in the future?
Absolutely.
And that the terrible things that happen to us possibly are God's plan. And if it happens, it happens.
And it also says, along came Boaz to Bethlehem.
Hmm.
So he wasn't always there, he just happened to show up
Or God brought him there.
when Ruth was there.
Yeah. So this is where we get into the theology of interpretation, right? Where we say, well, okay, how could that be by chance? We see where this goes. We know what the big picture plan is. And at the same time, we look at how the text is describing the situation. And it's in very earthy, happenstance kind of tones. And so that's where we look at it with our theology and we say, well, if this is the way God was leading it to happen, it's in a very ordinary, happenstance kind of way. The way you're just standing in line at a store and overhear a conversation, and then suddenly your day is very different than it was a moment before. It's in these little encounters, these little choices, these little things that happen between ordinary folk, that God's big picture plan of this is the way Jesus comes into the world, the way that all comes into being is, I was in the right place at the right time.
But isn't it interesting that this happened in Bethlehem?
Yeah.
The-
Say more.
The beginning of Jesus' lineage and then
Yeah.
where he was born.
So, before we get to Jesus, who else comes from Bethlehem?
Joseph.
True? Before Joseph. Who else is from Bethlehem of Judah? Yes. And so this is where we're walking our way back, because Ruth is going to end with a genealogy pointing to David. Not yet to Jesus. Obviously, this Old Testament, we're not thinking there yet. We can look back now and see that that's where this all goes. But so it lands us in Bethlehem because the person we're pointing towards is David. Yeah, who will also then be a descendant of Jesus. Yeah. Okay, but let's keep pushing. What else has to fall into place for this to work out? It takes being in the right place at the right time. What kind of person does Boaz have to be for this to be okay?
Well, man of substance. That he was described as earlier.
Well, and think about the way we interpreted that, right? One part of man of substance can be, he's just got a lot of money and a lot of power.
Right.
Is that necessarily a good thing?
No.
Not necessarily.
I think when you said
You have to
integrity,
have a good character too.
Yeah.
It sounded like it's more he had good character.
Yeah.
You see the so what does he do that reveals his good character?
What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you,
Right.
are you crazy?
Yeah.
Advising
Yeah.
her on her safety.
He says,
you know,
let
they're-
protect her.
So this is an important point that's being made about what righteousness is and what good integrity, good character is. It's how you use your power.
But didn't he have to be a kin? So he wouldn't do this to everybody, it's because
But
of
did
the
he know
kinship
this?
obligation?
He knows that she's connected to Naomi.
Okay.
And so
But this is the first he's heard of this because he's relying on his worker bee.
but he's heard the gossip.
The gossip,
He knows all about it.
the neighborhood gossip.
yeah. Now the time is,
Everybody was the neighborhood gossip.
Right.
So.
the time is very compressed. It's just a day or two ago that they came into town that Ruth is now showing up in his field. He does not say, "I'm kin to you" here,
Yeah.
right? But he is acting as a good kinsman in terms of looking out for family.
Yeah.
Ruth doesn't know that that's part of this yet.
Right.
But sure, Boaz does, of course. Yeah. So this is what I think this is pointing us towards, is this question of character, of how do you ensure that the land can give life to all people? And one of the things that is in the law to provide for that is gleaning as a practice. There's provision made for that. Boaz is clearly following that law because Ruth can show up with the other worker girls to participate in gleaning. He's also ensuring that she is physically safe. And so once more, you have power being used for a purpose that is just, that is to ensure safety and life-giving flourishing in the land. Both from the perspective of, can people eat, and can people go about their lives without constant fear? Yeah.
It reminds me of tithing.
Say more.
Mhm.
Say more. Yeah.
You know, what we have, everything we have comes from God,
Mhm.
and we're to, the scripture is you don't give leftovers, you
Yes.
give back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the saving implies to me that you purposefully are not taking it all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And-
exactly
and so
right.
you are giving back, and so
That just reminded
you
Yeah.
just see that, you just see the way that is developed,
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
way back.
All those thoughts are interconnected, right? They're all coming from, in the Torah, the common refrain for a lot of these commandments is, for I am the Lord your God, like do it because I said so. But another rationale that's often given, especially in relationship to how to handle the land, is for the land belongs to God.
everything.
This isn't yours. You're living on it, you're using it, but it belongs to me, and this is how I want to provide for others, for you and for those who dwell among you. Yeah. Same thing with tithing, you're exactly right. Let's keep pressing. We've got just a couple minutes here, and see if we can close out this conversation. So Ruth replies in verse 13, and she said, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord?" She's talking to Boaz as though she's talking to God.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of pushing on that point of maybe it's possible that God is acting through us. "Indeed, you have comforted me and spoken to the heart of your servant girl, and I am not even like one of your own servant girls." She knows she's a Moabite too.
Yeah.
And Boaz said to her at mealtime, "Come here and eat some of the bread and dip your piece in the sour wine." And she sat to one side of the harvesters, and he poured out for her roasted grain. And she ate and was satisfied and had some left over.
Had some left over.
What does that sound like to you? We're going to close here on verse 14. We'll pick back up here next week. But that scene,
Loaves and fishes.
Almost like a courtship.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack both. So loaves and fishes and courtship. So loaves and fishes. What sounds like loaves and fishes to you?
Was satisfied and had some left over. Yeah.
So here's what I would encourage us to consider. Keep these things in order, right? This comes before the Gospel of Matthew is ever written.
Mhm.
And so when the Gospel of Matthew says they were full and had some left over, they're thinking of Ruth.
Cool.
Yeah. And then, of course, we can read this pointing towards and see this sounds like feeding the 5,000.
Yeah.
They're participating in the same thing. It's part of the way that God is providing for the feeding of the people.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You said it sounds like a courtship. Say more.
Well, it's like he's picking her out for some special
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah.
And then this poetry part back over, in verse 12, we talked about it being so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
courtship,
Mhm.
beginning of a courtship.
It does,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Now we're going to hear later in the book that Boaz is kind of surprised that Ruth picks him out, and so it becomes this dilemma: is he trying to make this happen too,
Uh-huh.
or is he just doing this because it's the right thing to do?
I am not even like one of your servant girls.
Yeah.
I mean, that puts her in a distinctly different situation.
Mm-hmm.
But was he doing it because of Naomi? That she was helping Naomi?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Carl, you had something too.
What's the significance that she made the decision to sit to one side of the harvest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any significance to that?
It would not have been common for the men and women to eat together here in the field. So the fact that she's brought to the table and the fact that Boaz serves her is all deeply significant. Here are lines being crossed. And again, if we're thinking towards the gospel, here's Jesus eating with the sinners and tax collectors. He's eating with the wrong sort. Boaz is eating with the wrong sort. And vice versa, Ruth the Moabite shows profound boldness in coming into a place that
alone
was deeply hostile to her. I mean, have y'all ever been at a table where you realize I shouldn't be here? It's terrifying. And she remains. All right, let's pause there, and we will pick up in verse 15 and following next week, and continue into Ruth chapter 3. This is a great discussion, y'all. I want to close this with a word of prayer, and once more, this comes from our daily prayer book, and it's entitled A Prayer of Shelter and Shadow. And there's a sense in which this is going to play on when we are together and when we are alone. And I choose this one because I think it connects with a lot of what we're seeing here in Ruth, of what it means to belong, what it means to be together, and what it means to be isolated. So let us pray. It is in the shelter of each other that the people live, and it is in the shadow of each other that the people live. We know that sometimes we are alone, and sometimes we are in community. Sometimes we are in shadow, and sometimes we are surrounded by shelter. Sometimes we feel like exiles in our own land, in our own languages, and in our bodies. And sometimes we feel surrounded by welcome. As we seek to be human together, may we share the things that do not fade: generosity, truth-telling, silence, respect, and love. And may the power we share be for the good of all. We honor God, the source of this rich life, and we honor each other, storyful and lovely. Whether in our shadow or in our shelter, may we live well and fully with each other. Amen.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Good discussion.
Wonderful.
Have you ever read, or seen the play JB?
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school.
Doesn't get easier, does it?
No.